The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Last week, I came to you with this huge story about a massive number of sexual assaults in Cologne, Germany on New Year's Eve, reportedly perpetrated by men believed to be of North African and Middle Eastern descent, and also followers of the Islamic faith. Now, there were two stories within that original story. Story number one was the alleged cover-up of their background, being North African, Middle Eastern, and of the Muslim faith. Part two of that story was this code of conduct that was proposed by the mayor of Cologne for women, which led to people reacting and saying, that sounds like victim blaming. This sounds like the focus is merely on women rather than the perpetrators. The focus is not on all of the things it should be on. That story was last week. In the week since, Lewis, we have now seen a number of stories break, similar stories from other countries, and I'll tell you about some of those. And this is very, very disturbing. To begin with, Hamburg, Germany. In Hamburg, Germany, let's not even start in Hamburg. I'll start in Frankfurt. 7 women in Frankfurt, Germany, reported being sexually assaulted by men, reportedly of North African origin with, quote, strong Arabic accents. In Hamburg, Germany, 39 women have reportedly been sexually assaulted on New Year's Eve. We have more reports from Germany, from the cities of Berlin and Stuttgart and Dusseldorf, but we also have reports from other countries altogether. Indeed, we have reports from Switzerland, and we have reports from Finland, etc. But before I even get to those, let's look at some of the specifics of the reports in Germany. The reports from Berlin mirror those from other cities in terms of the apparent Middle Eastern or North African origin of the alleged perpetrators, and indeed an Iraqi and a Pakistani man have been arrested and reportedly came to the New Year's Eve events from a refugee camp. In Dusseldorf, we had 11 such incidents, and 2 in Stuttgart. All incidents involved perpetrators identified as North African, Middle Eastern, speaking Arabic, Arabic accents, etc. Now going to Helsinki, Finland. Police in Helsinki are reporting an unusually high level of sexual harassment reports from New Year's Eve. And they said they were tipped off to this because they heard that groups of asylum seekers and refugees were planning to harass women on New Year's Eve. And then we also know, Lewis, from the beautiful city of Zurich, Switzerland, that 6 women reported being sexually molested and robbed on New Year's Eve, with an additional 24 reports of theft alone, also reportedly happening, quote, in a crowd of multiple men with dark-colored skin. Of course, having dark skin does not prove anything about your descent or your religion, but that is what we heard from the reports there. And then lastly, going from Switzerland to Salzburg, Austria, police in Austria say they're investigating, quote, a number of complaints of sexual assault on New Year's Eve. 3 men already arrested. Lastly, if we go from the large cities we are now done with, this is not just in large cities. In a smaller Swedish town named Kalmar, at least 9 women have reported sexual assault on New Year's Eve. The alleged perpetrators in Sweden did not speak or understand Swedish. So reports from various countries, Lewis, talk about the possibility that refugees or asylum seekers could be deported if found guilty of sexual assault or theft. Without question, at this point, they should be deported if they are found guilty of that at a time when they are seeking refugee status. Do you not think?
Yeah, no, I agree. I just don't understand the mentality of someone who is seeking refuge, is seeking asylum, and then decides to go out and do something like this. Is it because they feel that, have they been, I don't know, do they feel like they've been mistreated? Do they feel like there's some injustice happening and this is some type of rebellious act? Or is this just a bunch of pigs acting like idiots?
This is really shaking up the left, including for some of the reasons Lewis mentions. The right knows how to respond. We don't agree with the response from the right, Lewis, but the response from the right is Muslims are bad, get them out, stop refugees, stop asylum, stop the whole thing. The left is more unsure, right? Do we ignore their background or do we talk about their background? Do we ignore or not or not ignore that they're refugees or seeking asylum? How do we critique this? Majid Nawaz wrote an article in the Daily Beast about this, and I think he is absolutely spot on. Let's take a look at what he had to say, Lewis. He said, yes, it is racist to suspect that all brown men who look like me are rapists. It is bigoted to presume that all Muslim men who share my faith advocate religiously justified rape. It is xenophobic to assume that all male refugees are sexual predators awaiting their chance to rape. But let me be absolutely clear. What will feed this racism, bigotry, and xenophobia even more is deliberately failing to report the facts as they stand. Doing so only encourages the populist right's rallying cry against, quote, the establishment. If liberals do not address such issues swiftly with complete candor and courage, the far right and anti-Muslim populist groups will get there first. They have been doing so for a while now. Read the entire article by Majid. We are linking to it from our YouTube page. Absolutely spot on, Lewis. The left has to take this head on without skipping key details.
Oh, that's what we're trying to do.
Right.
And immediately after posting our first video in response to the Cologne stuff, it was just comment after comment about how this is happening in other places, multiple comments about how this type of thing has been happening in Sweden for quite some time.
Right.
And huge issue. You know, what good does it do the world to just deny that this is happening?
Now, some regressives have come out and done and said things that make absolutely no sense. After the attacks in Cologne, Germany on New Year's Eve, we talked about how it was a very widespread in terms of media coverage, that the background of the men was not mentioned. And then we started seeing all sorts of strange comments come out. Now, our friend Dave Rubin from Rubin Report over on Aura TV, he found a few instances of sort of very regressive comments, and I want to outline them for you here. At the top of the list is one we already covered, which is that the mayor of Cologne, Germany, had this code of conduct released, which was mostly focused on what the women should be doing, what the victims should be doing. And while we talked about this, Lewis, there's a difference between sort of practical advice about how to be cautious and bordering on victim blaming. And we already talked about how many of the elements of that code of conduct made no sense. Like, for example, keep strangers at arm's length away from you in crowds in public, right? Some elements of that made absolutely no sense. Dave talked about that. We talked about that. But there are other examples that Dave Rubin pointed out in a really great article. He pointed to a tweet, Lewis, from self-described feminist Lori Penny, presumably a progressive, I don't really know. She tweeted something out truly reminiscent of the right. She said, quote, so bored of racists who only pretend to care about women's rights when they see an opportunity to bash Muslims. This is straight out of the right-wing playbook, almost alluding to sort of concern trolling, because you can criticize Muslims by reporting the story. This is akin to when right-wingers say, oh, the left is racist for seeing racism. This is the left saying someone claiming to care about women's rights is racist because the perpetrators appear to be Muslim. This is absolutely regressive, and we have to watch out for stuff like this, Lewis. This is not good. This is exactly what Majid Nawaz is saying we should not be doing.
Yeah, you know, the right is always accusing us of making everything about race, right? In this case, you know, I don't know if this is about race technically, right?
Right, absolutely.
I mean, so I don't know. You just have someone here who's very afraid of appearing to be an Islamophobe. Maybe someone who hasn't even really looked into what has happened here and is just kind of throwing this stuff out there for everyone to see anyway.
And a third example, which Dave Rubin points out, is straight up conspiracy theory material. This comes to us from Frances Coppola, who's a writer at Forbes, according to her Forbes profile page. She threw out an absolutely baseless conspiracy theory where she said, I bet they did. I suspect anti-immigration people of organizing the Cologne sex crimes. Fastest way of getting borders closed. This is, again, reminiscent of right-wing false flag conspiracy theories. The idea that, no, the reports are wrong. What we have here, Lewis, is a completely unproven hypothesis that it's actually people who want to stop immigration who coordinated these attacks to make it appear as though migrants, immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers are guilty of rape so that we shut down the border. Baseless claim. I mean, no evidence whatsoever.
Yes, the claim is that in multiple cities in Germany
Right.
and other countries on New Year's Eve, somehow they all coordinated, and people were raping, robbing, and sexually assaulting their own citizens and neighbors in an attempt to close borders. No, I don't think that's what happened.
Absolutely baseless, and great job by Dave Rubin staying on top of this stuff, as we will. El Chapo Guzmán has been caught. Last July, Mexican drug kingpin El Chapo Guzmán escaped from Altiplano, the maximum security prison where he was being held. A mile-long tunnel was used. A motorbike was used. Every indication was that he had some help on the inside because that tunnel ended up directly beneath his cell. After a 6-month manhunt, he was finally recaptured over the weekend in the northwestern town of Los Mochis by Mexican Marines. Everything that's going on with this is crazy. Number one, he is in the process of being extradited to the United States, but temporarily, he's back at the same prison, Lewis, where he escaped. And we have every reason to believe he has friends on the inside there. They put him back in the exact same prison he already escaped from. I mean, what sense does this make?
It doesn't make much sense. He may have friends in higher places than just the prison.
Maybe so.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, that may be. And the other thing that is sort of odd that's going on, the picture we have up is of Sean Penn with El Chapo. Sean Penn interviewing El Chapo during the time that he was on the run, and hugely controversial. Some saying, oh, Sean Penn is guilty of something here because this was somebody that there was a manhunt for this guy, and Sean Penn interviewed him and did not provide any information to law enforcement. At the same time, legal experts saying, no, he did not actually aid and abet this man in any way whatsoever, and what he did was perfectly legal, while at the same time, we have now learned that Sean Penn's phone was tapped and that the conversations he had in the lead up to this interview may have contributed to the eventual capture of El Chapo. Just a very bizarre story.
Yes. I don't really know what to make of the whole Sean Penn thing. I can just say, certainly I don't think he's guilty of anything. I mean, that's like saying that when a reporter goes and talks to some terrorist, some terrorist leader or whatever, if they don't provide information to the police, I mean, it's crazy. But it is interesting, the whole phone tapping thing.
It is all very, very interesting, and we will probably have more information about it in the next day or two. We will take a break. I'm on Twitter at @DPackman. Lewis is on Twitter at LewisMotamedy.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show is made possible financially by our members. Today's new member of the day is Jay Pease. Jay, thank you so much for being a David Pakman Show member. Jay and all members get instant access to the world-famous bonus show, the commercial-free audio and video streams of the show, and so many other great member benefits, including an archive of shows dating all the way back to 2005. I will not sugarcoat it. Those 2005 shows are pretty rough, and our members get access by signing up at davidpakman.com/membership. Remember that if you ever shop on Amazon.com, the shopping you do can support the work that we do. If before shopping, you go to davidpakman.com/Amazon. Over the last week, the back-to-school textbook purchases have started, Lewis. The most expensive book in the last week is one called Physical Chemistry for the Chemical and Biological Sciences, an $82 book. That's relative, as shocking as this is, that's relatively inexpensive. Last year, we saw a $280 book purchased, a textbook for college. It is such a racket. I mean, it is stunning, the racket that represents.
Yeah, it's education. There's big money to be made in education, Dave. Well, like with anything, really.
Also, one of our viewers buying Taxi Driver on DVD. Such a fantastic film. It's been probably 5 or 6 years since I saw Taxi Driver. Of course, the Martin Scorsese film, Robert De Niro, Jodie Foster. What a fantastic movie. I mean, it's hard to find something wrong with that film.
Yeah, it's a great movie. It's a messed up movie.
Yeah.
It's crazy. But I think that it's, yeah, I mean, it's clear to see why this movie kind of propelled Scorsese into fame.
Remember, anytime you shop on Amazon, go to davidpakman.com/Amazon. I recommend bookmarking the link and using it whenever you shop. Okay, I have a hilarious update about the domestic terrorist armed group of people. I mean, I hate to even call it a militia because that actually makes it sound more legit than what it is. Last week, I told you about this armed domestic terrorist so-called militia led by Ammon Bundy, the son of Cliven Bundy, the Nevada rancher. And they had asked for snacks to be sent since they clearly hadn't really planned ahead. And things are getting completely nuts. First of all, we're in the second week of this occupation. There's no sign whatsoever that this occupation is going to be ending anytime soon. Now, another heavily armed group of individuals showed up at the wildlife refuge where this building is occupied, presumably, Lewis, to provide security for the occupying militia. So you have one occupying so-called militia that is taking over a building. They apparently are in some kind of danger, so a second militia has shown up to provide security for them. That militia is part of the Pacific Patriots Network. This is all completely nuts. I mean, these names are ludicrous. The idea of this is everything that's going on is ludicrous.
Yes, I think the strangest part is that they are kind of occupying a building. I mean, whatever they're doing, it's pretty much irrelevant. I mean, the people who need to operate out of this building are now operating somewhere else.
Right.
Life continues.
Yes.
And now you just have a bunch of these militiamen sitting in a building,
with no snacks.
Starving themselves. They have no snacks. and they're accomplishing absolutely nothing.
Right.
So, I mean, there is no point in trying to take over the building or getting into some type of armed conflict. Just let them sit there.
Absolutely. And it's not clear. We now have a list. So the Ammon Bundy militia has named itself the Citizens for Constitutional Freedom. We have a list of demands now. This is one of the best things that we've had on the show in months, okay? We have a list of demands that are presumably from the Citizens for Constitutional Freedom, although it's not clear whether the PPN, the other group that's there, the Pacific Patriots Network, whether they were involved in the creation of this list of demands. Here are just some of the demands on their list, the stuff that they're asking for, okay? They're asking for both Miracle Whip and mayonnaise. You'll notice mayonnaise is misspelled. Miracle Whip and mayonnaise? How do you need both Miracle Whip and mayonnaise? I thought that they were essentially the same thing. Apparently, they have a need for both of those. They want brats, okay? Brats, German sausages. They want any canned foods as well as hay. And then I love this, just thrown in the middle of all this, they want money. They want, if you can send them some supplies, send them some money. Why they need money in the middle of nowhere in this federal building, I have absolutely no idea. They need laundry detergent as well as boxer briefs. That's an interesting combination of items. We could read a lot into that, Lewis. They also want, and this, I assume they mean aprons. They've misspelled it. They want 4-inch aprons. I did a Google search for aprons, A-P-R-A-N-S. Nothing came up. I assume it's a misspelling of aprons. They need gaming supplies. I don't know if tabletop gaming or they're more into Magic the Gathering, the way Lewis is, or what types of games they're looking for. They want gaming supplies. Maybe that refers to game hunting, like hunting. I don't know. Okay. They also want tampons. I didn't think there were any women involved here. So, I mean, I would love an explanation as to why they need tampons. 3 different types of cigarettes, as well as chewing tobacco they need. Lewis, what do you make of this? This is very, very odd, an odd list of demands, and a sort of pathetic list as well. If you're this occupying force taking over to fight the tyranny of the government, it's not very self-sufficient to be asking people to send tampons. It doesn't really project strength, does it?
Yeah, I I don't know. I guess not. I think I just would like to point out that I
Please.
believe the difference between Miracle Whip and regular mayo is that Miracle Whip might have some sugar added to it.
So it's like
I
turning
don't know.
mayonnaise into candy.
I could be wrong, but anyway, do they already have bread? Do they have cheese? Do they have the meat? Are they going to make like brat sandwiches with mayo?
They wanted other stuff too. I mean,
Yeah,
this is only
okay.
a selection from the list, so maybe bread was also on the list. This is turning into a joke. It always has been a joke, but it's not that funny because we're talking about an armed group that has taken over a federal building. And
It's kind of funny.
It's funny in the sense that they think this is a political action of any kind of meaning. But beyond that, it's quite disturbing that armed people are being allowed to, for a second week now, take over a federal building.
I think we should not send them any games and only send them the Miracle Whip or the regular mayo,
Right.
but not both.
Don't send them both. Make them choose, right? I mean, they
Yeah.
should be suffering a little bit. It's either Miracle Whip or mayo. It's not both. There's a New York Times article pointing to some new polls from over the weekend that are very favorable for Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders in some of the early voting states. Corporate media is essentially ignoring these polls. Let's discuss. First of all, Iowa. Let's start with Iowa. A new NBC Wall Street Journal Marist poll taken just a few days ago puts the race at Hillary Clinton 48, Bernie Sanders 45 in Iowa. This is a drop-off for Hillary Clinton, although not a big one. And in New Hampshire, we have 3 2016 polls in the Democratic race, 3 polls taken in 2016, which have Bernie Sanders with an average lead of about 5 points by roughly 50 to 45%. Now, the bad news for Bernie Sanders is that he has no reason to think, and the data from South Carolina and Nevada is not very new, but it does appear as though Bernie is down big in both of those 2 states, down 20 points to Hillary Clinton in Nevada, down something like 50 points in South Carolina. So what can we say now? This is the same thing that Bill Scher said on the show last week. The path for Bernie Sanders is you go to Iowa and you get about 50% of the vote. Maybe you win 50 to 45. Okay, you get 50% of the delegates. You're in first place. You go to New Hampshire, February 9th. You get 45%. You come in second, but after both of those, you're basically tied with Hillary Clinton. That gets you some momentum going into Nevada, the third primary, and maybe you can cut that 20-point lead to only a 10-point deficit, okay? Then, after 3 states, you've still got about 40% of the delegates. That's really not bad, and maybe that momentum makes it so that you don't lose by 50 in South Carolina, which would be bad for Bernie Sanders. That's the path I see, Lewis. It's an uphill climb, but it's not an impossible path. If you come out of the first 3 primaries with 40% of the delegates, you're in pretty good shape.
I think so. Well, like we said, there was one seemingly infallible predictor who said that Bernie Sanders is going to win.
Right.
Another seemingly infallible predictor said Bernie has no chance. So
Right.
One of them is right. I hope it's the former. And, well, what can we do? We'll just cross our fingers.
1 month from today, it is January 11th. By February 11th, we will have results from the first 2 primaries, and we will have, the speculation will at least start to subside heading into the March Super Tuesday where 20-something states have their primaries. That's where we are today. We will continue covering it. Make sure to discuss this story with us on Facebook at facebook.com/David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Today, we have the first part of our investigation into claims made by Reza Aslan. We will remind you who Reza Aslan is and start looking into some of the statements he's made over the last couple of years. Reza Aslan is an author and professor of creative writing at the University of California, Riverside. He makes regular media appearances commenting on religion and in particular Islam. He's appeared on Real Time with Bill Maher several times. He's done many news interviews. In the U.S., over the past few years, he's been one of the loudest voices in public conversations about Islam and terrorism, topics that have obviously become more important and widely discussed lately with the increase of Islamic terrorism all around the world over the last 15 years, as well as the dramatic increase of a variety of types of terror in the United States over the last year.
Over the last few years, however, the terrorist threat has evolved into a new phase.
Last year marked the biggest annual rise in deaths caused by terrorism, with more than 32,000 people killed in attacks around the world. The Institute for Economics and Peace has compiled its annual Global Terrorism Index and looked at the figures from 2000 to the end of 2014. It found terrorism is rising dramatically and private citizens are increasingly the targets. Terrorism is on the rise with an almost five-fold increase in fatalities since 9/11. After 13 years of spending trillions on two wars with hundreds of thousands of civilian casualties, the annual count of terror attacks has more than quadrupled. Reza Aslan has written two best-selling books, No God But God, The Origins, Evolution, and Future of Islam, and Zealot, The Life and Time of Jesus of Nazareth. We've seen him promoting these books on TV and radio, being regarded as a scholar of religion when he's interviewed, and over the years, he's become a very popular go-to commentator on the topic of Islam.
Welcome to my guest tonight. He is a religious scholar, a best-selling author. His books include No God But God and Zealot. Please welcome back to the program, Reza Aslan. Hello,
Author and religious historian Reza Aslan appeared on Piers Morgan last night.
Reza, let me start with you. As a religious scholar, as a Muslim, as an American, what is your reaction?
Is a established authority on religions.
We had him on a few weeks ago on HuffPost Live, and we had a really substantive, serious conversation.
He has the thankless task of setting the lazy and stupid media right, like our show, about Islam.
Unfortunately, progressives need to critically analyze Aslan's claims for themselves, and that's exactly what we're going to do here. Before even getting into the analysis of Aslan's claims, it's important to begin with how he represents his credentials and education in interviews. On numerous occasions, Aslan has referred to himself as having a PhD in, quote, the history of religions.
I am an expert with a PhD in the history of religions.
We're already off track. Reza Aslan does not have a PhD in the history of religions. He has one PhD, and it's in sociology. His educational credentials include a Bachelor of Arts in Religious Studies from Santa Clara University, a Master of Theological Studies in Theology from Harvard University, a Master of Fine Arts in Fiction Writing from the University of Iowa, and a PhD in Sociology from the University of California, Santa Barbara. Aslan's biography on his own website says that he has a PhD in the sociology of religions, not history. But even this is not exactly true. Aslan's own graduate advisor at UC Santa Barbara was interviewed and confirmed that Aslan's PhD is simply in sociology and nothing else, that the words history, religion, or theology don't appear anywhere in the title of his degree, and further, that UC Santa Barbara has never even offered a PhD program called Sociology of Religions. Aslan's PhD dissertation is about political activism. It's available online, and it's purely a sociological paper, not historical or theological. He certainly doesn't have a PhD in the history of religion, which is a specific and entirely different disciplinary field.
I am a PhD in the history of religions.
Aslan has been confronted about this. He acknowledges that his degree is in sociology and that it was given to him by UCSB's sociology department, and that department alone. But he responds by explaining that a significant portion of his classes focused on religion. Nevertheless, Aslan continues to receive criticism for the way he represents his degrees because most professional academics avoid repeatedly advertising their credentials or giving false, definitive specifications about the names of their degrees. In the interest of fairness, Aslan had actually started the PhD at UCSB, originally in the Religious Studies department, but he then chose to move to the Sociology department because, as he claims, the Religious Studies professors at UCSB were jealous of what was his latest book at the time.
And to be clear, I just want to emphasize this one more time. I am a historian.
Aslan has no degree in history. A number of professional historians and religious scholars have publicly questioned the way that Aslan presents his qualifications, like Professor of Religion at Columbia University, Elizabeth Castelli, who wrote an article on thenation.com specifically about how Aslan represented his credentials in the Fox News interview we've heard so much about. She said that Aslan is less of a historian and more of a reader of religious history, who then translates the material for a wider sort of general public audience, somewhat of a popularizer of religious history, rather than a proper historian or researcher himself. She said that Aslan would probably be better received and criticized less by historians if he were to write books and present himself as an outsider to the field of religious history, as opposed to constantly insisting how legitimate he is as a working academic historian.
Well, look, I mean, truly, I was kind of embarrassed. I mean, there's nothing more distasteful than an academic having to, like, trot out his credentials. I mean, you really come off as a jerk when you do that. But I write books about what's going on in the Muslim world because I have an expertise in what's going on in the Muslim world. My credentials as a scholar of religion. My credentials as a scholar of religion. All of the universities that have educated me, and all of the universities that have employed me.
Hold on, I have to respond to that as the Islamic scholar, as the person with a PhD in Islam in this conversation.
Nevertheless, an expert on the Bible and on Judaism and Christianity and Islam. Well, to be clear, I am a scholar of religions with 4 degrees, including one in the New Testament and fluency in Biblical Greek, who has been studying the origins of Christianity for 2 decades.
So Aslan regularly refers to himself as a scholar, academic, and professor of religion, but again, he actually has minimal academic authority among circles of formal religious academics and historians. Compared to most scholars in his area of study, Aslan actually has very little work published in peer-reviewed journals. Also, those who call themselves professors or academics usually have consistent employment teaching or researching within their field of study. While Aslan has taught religion during the 2 brief guest teaching positions in the past, one at Drew University and the other at his alma mater, University of Iowa, the only consistent academic position Aslan has ever had is professor of creative writing at UC Riverside, which is what he still does currently. Normally, scholars are intentionally careful to avoid overstating their qualifications, often giving disclaimers about the narrowness of their expertise for fear of overstepping in the presence of other scholars. Aslan does the opposite. When participating in debates or interviews, he frequently and enthusiastically reasserts how credible and scholarly he is, while taking the liberties we've described when talking about his degrees. Beyond his debatable status as a working scholar of religion and the way that he represents his degrees, the more important problem is the substance of Aslan's commentary and rhetoric. He goes out of his way to defend organized religions, more so Islam and the Muslim world, in ways that are often inconsistent with a realistic understanding of religion's relationship to modern society, to say the least. Let's begin with Reza Aslan's numerous dubious claims about female genital mutilation in the Muslim world, sometimes incorrectly known as female circumcision. FGM is practiced mostly in different African, Middle Eastern, and Asian countries. It's a procedure that sometimes kills the girl involved, either by bleeding or infection. Victims of FGM can also experience lifelong health issues like chronic pain or infertility. Reza Aslan has denied that female genital mutilation has any sort of connection with Islam. In 2014, Bill Maher made some comments on his show about Islam and mentioned FGM. Afterwards, Aslan appeared on CNN to respond to Bill Maher, and in his criticism of Maher's comments, Aslan claimed that female genital mutilation is not an Islamic problem, but a Central African problem.
It's a Central African problem.
Aslan then referred to a July 2013 UNICEF study about FGM, which included this map. Just by glancing at the map, you can quickly realize that Aslan's claim about FGM being a Central African problem is not quite right. First of all, this study, which Aslan cited, clearly illustrates that FGM spans all across Africa and the Middle East, and includes the country of Egypt, which is politically more associated with the Muslim world than Africa.
You know, frankly, when it comes to the topic of religion, he's not very sophisticated in the way that he thinks. I mean, the argument about the female genital mutilation being an Islamic problem is a perfect example of that. It's not an Islamic problem, it's an African problem.
On this map, which Aslan posted to Twitter, we can see the 29 countries in Africa and the Middle East that UNICEF chose to study because of their high percentiles of FGM within their entire female population. Aside from whether the countries are geographically in Africa, of the 29 countries studied, most with an FGM problem are majority Muslim. The countries with the top 4 largest percentages of FGM are all majority Muslim, and in those countries, girls are almost universally subjected to mutilation. Among the top 8 FGM countries on the map, 7 of them are majority Muslim. According to that same UNICEF report that Aslan cites, Muslim women from a variety of the African countries say that FGM is their Islamic duty. While there is disagreement about FGM in the Muslim world, there are definitely Islamic experts and leaders who explain that Islamic scripture mandates, condones, or at least fails to prohibit FGM. Muhammad said, quote, "Circumcision is a sunnah tradition for the men and makruma, an honorable deed, for the women." The most often mentioned narration reports a debate between Muhammad and Habiba. This woman, known as an exciser of female slaves, was one of a group of women who had immigrated with Muhammad. Having seen her, Muhammad asked her if she kept practicing her profession. She answered affirmatively, adding, quote, "Unless it is forbidden and you can order me to stop doing it," quote. Muhammad replied, quote, "Yes, it is allowed. Come closer so I can teach you. If you cut, do not overdo it, because it brings more radiance to the face and it is more pleasant for the husband."
Nowhere else in the Muslim majority states is female genital mutilation an issue.
Outside of Africa, nowhere else in the Muslim world is FGM an issue. This is an incredible statement because not only is FGM a problem in Muslim countries outside of Africa, FGM is almost exclusively a Muslim problem outside of Africa. Practically all FGM outside of Africa is practiced by Muslims in the Middle East and Asia. Here is every country outside of Africa that has a significant FGM problem. They are all majority Muslim countries except for 5, and in those 5, the FGM is only practiced by the Muslim communities within the country. In Kurdish Iraq, 72% FGM rate among Kurdish females. In Indonesia, a 98% FGM rate among Muslim Indonesian females. Indian Bohras, a 90% FGM rate among Shia Muslim Bohra females in India. In Malaysia, a 93% FGM rate among Muslim Malaysian females. In Thailand, FGM is practiced by Thai Muslims. And in Yemen, there is a 30% FGM rate among Yemeni females. Despite the reports we've gotten from those countries confirming FGM, there are a number of factors suggesting that such statistics in the Middle East are actually unreliable and underrepresented. In the Middle East and in many Muslim countries, sexuality and genital mutilation traditions are almost never discussed in public or even between men and women. African societies are more open about such things, thus it is easier to collect data in Africa than it is in the Middle East and in the rest of the Muslim world about FGM. In addition, autocratic regimes in the Middle East are notorious for preventing independent surveys about human rights from being conducted within their borders, and they instead often supply their own data to international organizations. One might infer from this that the disclosure of FGM is probably often suppressed by the same Islamic power structures that encourage it. Another reason that FGM is underrepresented in the Middle East is that researchers and organizations are often in fear of seeming bigoted, specifically Islamophobic, for hypothesizing or proving that there is a causal relationship between Islam and FGM. This is why people like Aslan can be dangerous. Not only is Aslan going around and saying that FGM has nothing to do with Islam, he helps to establish a sort of environment of political correctness among liberals and intellectuals, which goes to inhibit global research about these things in the first place. Aslan says, quote, "All of this is to say that while it is almost impossible to come up with some sort of connection that binds countries that have a female genital mutilation problem, it is clear that whatever that connection is, it's not religious." We will pause there for today. Tomorrow we will have the conclusion to our investigation.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So a Muslim woman was kicked out of a Donald Trump rally over the weekend for no apparent reason. This is Rose Hamid, who told CNN that she, quote, came to the rally to let Trump supporters see what a Muslim looks like. She stood silently with a T-shirt that read, "I come in peace." And about halfway through the South Carolina rally, people in the crowd started getting agitated. They started shouting epithets at the woman, and she was ultimately escorted out by security. It's crazy what's going on at these Trump rallies. Here's some video of it. Take a look.
Usual situation here in Rock Hill, South Carolina tonight. A 56-year-old flight attendant who is a Muslim who lives in Charlotte. We spoke to her before the rally. She stood up during the rally when Donald Trump was talking about Syrian refugees. She was not saying anything. It was a moment of relative silence. And then suddenly some people in the crowd around her sort of turned on her, and some police came forward her, as you can probably see this video here, and escorted her out. Right. And my colleague Jeremy Diamond spoke to her afterward, and she said that she was very surprised by this. She said she came to this rally with the idea of allowing Trump supporters to see what a Muslim looks like. Of course, there's been so much inflammatory rhetoric in the last several weeks since Donald Trump has called for a ban on travel for Muslims coming into the U.S. So she said she came to this rally in not far from Charlotte just to see it, and mainly so Trump supporters could see her. But as you can see there, she made it about halfway through the rally, and she was escorted out. So just one of several disruptions at this rally tonight. Of course, not as many as last night in Burlington, Vermont. But Anderson, it was an unusual moment, somewhat of an uncomfortable moment for someone sitting around her.
The entire crowd is cheering that this woman is getting thrown out, and she was just standing there silently. I mean, okay, she was asked to leave initially and she didn't, so she was thrown out. Why is a woman who's standing silently being asked to leave? And Trump's explanation was, there is hatred against us that is unbelievable. It's their hatred, it's not our hatred. That's what Trump was saying as this woman was being escorted out. She then went on CNN and told Don Lemon that someone kept asking her if she had a bomb during the event. Let's take a listen to that.
Did one person really say, you have a bomb, you have a bomb?
Yeah, the one guy was saying, get out, do you have a bomb, do you have a bomb? And I said, no, do you have a bomb? So no, they were saying ugly things. One guy was saying, God is great. And I'm like, yeah, God is great. And one guy said, Isa loves you, which is the Arabic word for Jesus. And I said, yeah, I know, and Jesus loves you too. So it's, the thing is that people don't even know what they're saying. They don't even, they just get riled up in the hate mongering.
Okay. Yeah. It was otherwise a very, very diverse crowd of mostly middle-aged white people. I don't know why this woman would have attracted any attention. At least they didn't beat her up like the numerous black guys, Lewis, who have been beaten up at Trump rallies. Is that a silver lining here?
Sure, I wouldn't put it past a crowd at a Trump rally to kill a Muslim. Now, I think that I brought this up a few weeks ago. I said, well, what happens when someone who's Muslim goes to a Trump rally and makes it clear that they're Muslim?
Now we know.
I guess you just have to stand there and not say a word, and they won't beat you up. But you will be asked to leave for no reason.
Don Lemon asked her later in the interview whether she would consider voting for Donald Trump, which is a pretty stupid question. I think a more interesting question would have been to ask her about her stance as a Muslim woman on homosexuality, gay marriage, female genital mutilation, or the consequences for apostasy that should be felt by someone if they choose to leave Islam. Because that, to me, would have been a far more interesting question. Someone who was kicked out and treated in a very hostile manner at a Trump rally, does she have radical beliefs that are not uncommon within the Muslim religious world or not? That would have been a far more interesting question for me. But no surprise, Lewis, here, that it did not go particularly well to show up as a Muslim woman peacefully at a Trump event. I don't think any of us are surprised about that.
I think she probably knew how this would go. Maybe that's what she wanted. Maybe she wanted to appear on Don Lemon's show, right?
Maybe so, yeah. Maybe she wanted publicity, and she certainly obtained it. And these Trump rallies are, I still don't think we've hit bottom with the Trump rallies, that's for sure. We have a voicemail number, and that number is 219-2-DAVID-P. You can call any time of day. Here's a voicemail I received.
Hey, David, I just had a question. What would happen if Black Lives Matter took over a government building and demanded that, their voices be heard? Would that be okay?
Yeah.
Just a thought,
Right. We talked about this, Lewis. If the Oregon armed protesters were either black or Muslim, they'd probably be dead by now. I think we know it would be very different.
I think it would end similarly to how that standoff in Philadelphia ended 40-something years ago, probably with a bomb being dropped on the building.
It would not be the same situation, that is for sure. On today's bonus show, New Delhi's new smog plan. Chicago will pay reparations to torture victims. We will also talk a very disturbing story. Fake life vests sold to refugees in Turkey. Sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. Get instant access to the bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.